Blue Lock is an absolute treasure trove of well-written supporting characters. In fact, in my opinion, they've got some of the most compelling development and storylines I've ever come across. You've got the story of Nagi searching for meaning and interrogating his relationship with his best friend. The story of Rin struggling to find his own path after being betrayed by his hero. The story of Barrow striving to stay true to his ideals in a world that's out to deny him. And then there's Chigiri, who's just kind of fast. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if many of you kind of agreed with this statement. For a long time, this was at least my view on Chigiri's character. But as you probably suspect, I made this video to convince you that there's way more to Chigiri, and that the manga actually uses him in really interesting ways. Hello, my name is Sean, and I honestly didn't expect you guys to be nearly as excited about this topic as you were. Now, before I get to Chigiri himself, I need to clarify the terms in which I'm going to analyze his character. I get the sense that many readers consider character writing synonymous with character development. That a well-written character is someone who struggles and changes over the course of the story. Yet, in my view, that's only one aspect of character writing, especially when you're looking at Blue Lock. One of the most striking aspects of Blue Lock's character writing is how it uses its cast to illustrate particular ideas and concepts. And you'll find that certain characters have the tendency to appear at specific moments within the manga's narrative structure. To give you some examples, both of which I've elaborated on in earlier videos. Bachira is conceptually the character who is always one step ahead, whether it's in awakening his dormant ego or settling into a new environment. Barrow, on the other hand, becomes prominent when the manga explores issues of team hierarchy and power dynamics. At the start of the manga, he's the first to transform a group of strikers into a functional team. And in the NEL, it's no coincidence that King Barrow serves as the main antagonist in the match where Isagi and Kaiser compete for the throne of Bastard München. That brings us to Chigiri and his function within Blue Lock's wider narrative. So no more beating around the bush. Here's my central take for the video. Chigiri's character is used whenever the manga interrogates the limits of the Blue Lock cast. In fact, this is intrinsically tied to his most notable ability, his weapon, which actually, if you think about it, stands out among those of his peers. For most Blue Lock characters, their specialties rely on technique or on playmaking, whereas Chigiri distinguishes himself in a much more straightforward manner, by stretching his body to its absolute limit. Always faster, always beyond expectations. That's Hyouma Chigiri's vision on how to become the best in the world. There's a really programmatic scene in the U20 match where Sai cues Shido on how to make the best possible play. Sai talks about realistic plays and Shido's ideal plays, and tells him that the best possible goal comes about by blending the two together. That's basically the blueprint of how to visualize your peak performance. Or, to put it differently, Sai wants Shido to seek out the absolute limits of his abilities, but without misjudging the boundary of his physical capacities. So let me explain how that relates to the Chigiri we find at the start of the manga. Back in his glory days, Chigiri used his talents to wrest the top spot of his team from the Vanima twins. In his own words, this was simply a matter of talent. The world is divided into haves and have-nots, and he happens to be one of the chosen few. So, For a younger Chigiri, playing football is a means to prove that he is someone extraordinary, blessed with God-given talents. Chigiri's backstory stands in dialogue with two scenes from later in the manga. The first of these is Jinpachi Ego's speech on the nature of talent in chapter 56, which is interestingly enough placed right before Isagi faces off against Chigiri's team in the 3v3. This discussion is prompted by Hirotoshi Buratatsu, the chairman of the Japanese Football Union, questioning the necessity of an elaborate training program. Football is all about talent after all, so why would you waste money on something like Blue Lock if prodigies will appear regardless of how they're cultivated? It's really striking how closely Buratatsu's words echo those of the younger Chigiri. For both of them, exceptional players are all nature, no nurture. Ego, however, vehemently disagrees. In his view, Japan's failure to properly foster its talents has crushed countless prodigies. The issue is that one's natural abilities, that which Chigiri and Buratatsu call talent, only amounts to raw ore. For Ego, there is more to being talented than that. Someone is only talented or a genius if they polish their innate qualities and bring about concrete results. That brings me to Blue Lock's second speech about talent, this time in the words of Manshine City coach Chris Prince. After Prince assesses his Blue Lock players, he comes to a similar conclusion as Ego. They're still too reliant on their innate talents, and they don't realize that these will wither away if they're not properly cared for. As an example, Prince says, imagine there were someone whose talent is his fast running speed. Purely hypothetically, of course. It's not like this applies to anyone whose face is plastered in the middle of that very panel. And that imaginary person then fucks up their body by yearning for power. And let's say that this someone subsequently loses confidence, becomes mentally unstable, and almost brings an end to their football career. It's Chigiri. Chris Prince's speech is meant to evoke Chigiri. Chigiri experienced success and stardom without understanding the mechanisms behind his success, and the remnants of that curse still haunt him to this very day. As so many prodigies before him, Chigiri got drunk on his talents and overstretched, in the most literal sense of the words, as he ended up tearing his ACL. Basically, Chigiri's past serves as a cautionary tale about what happens to those who are too reliant on their talents. His downfall is a confirmation of Ego's and Prince's views. So the Chigiri before Blue Lock veered into territory beyond his physical limits and destroyed his body as a result. As attested by both Ego and Prince, raw talent doesn't matter if it only drives you to crash and burn. So that brings us to the early stages of the first selection, where Chigiri is actively holding back. He won't reveal his weapon, he's happy to keep playing defense. But perhaps most illustrative of all is a scene after Team Z's first win. Isagi realizes he needs to improve his physical specs, so he puts in some extra endurance training. And with their newfound confidence, the entire team joins in and starts running after our protagonist. Everyone except Chigiri. It's a scene that perfectly blends the figurative and the literal. Chigiri is Blue Lock's best runner, and yet, when everyone starts racing, he's the only one standing still. And with that, Chigiri has reached the other extreme of the Sai model, where his younger self went beyond what he was physically capable of. The Chigiri at the start of the manga was not even envisioning his ideal plays. So for Chigiri, more than anyone else, maintaining the perfect balance of his limits is almost a matter of life or death. As one of the few characters who's fully reliant on his exceptional physicality, Chigiri can only survive the Blue Lock program if he pushes his body to its absolute limits. Yet, the moment he overextends will mark the end of his football career, like a sword of Damocles hovering above his neck. In other words, the fact that he's still thriving in Blue Lock is a testament to how he strikes the perfect balance between the real and the ideal. And that's why it's so interesting to see how Chigiri is used in the rest of the manga. So for the remainder of this video, I'm gonna speedrun, pun very much intended, Chigiri's appearances throughout the manga, and show how each and every time he comes into prominence at moments when Blue Lock wants to say something about its characters hitting their limits. In the final match of the first selection, Team Z finds itself hopelessly outmatched by their rivals from Team V. And this is really hammered home by the comparison between Chigiri and Zantetsu. When things start looking grim, Isagi reminds his teammates that they still have another ace up their sleeve. But where in the previous match, Chigiri could turn the tides because his speed eclipsed everyone on the field, Team V suddenly unveils a player who effortlessly outpaces this ostensive prodigy. The point is clear. Zantetsu's win over Chigiri proves that Team V has gotten them beat on every conceivable metric. Fortunately, Bachira manages to inject a dose of hope into his dejected team. Yet interestingly enough, it's not Bachira who ascends to a higher level. Rather, the concept of awakenings itself is introduced through Chigiri. So where Bachira catches up to Team V, it's Chigiri who's actually the first to smash through the ceiling and awaken his untapped potential. And it's only after Chigiri transcends his limits and reaches unprecedented heights that Nagi and Isagi can have an awakening of their own as well. That brings us to the match against Chigiri in the second selection. In the 3v3, one team is characterized by its harmonious balance, whereas the other is chock full of raw potential that isn't being actualized. Yet in the end, the combination of Chigiri, Kunigami, and Reo only made the best of their pre-existing abilities, and with that, they fell short against a group that continuously challenged their teammates to exceed their limits. And so, there was really only one option for Isagi's team to pick: the player who embodies the ideal of continuously surpassing one's limits, up to the very end of the match. Then we reach the third selection, and here, Chigiri is used as a foil to Isagi. In the third selection matches, the remaining candidates need to assert themselves among Blue Lock's top 6. Yet for most of his match against Karasu and Otoya, Isagi struggles to prove his worth in the face of vastly superior players. All of that is exacerbated by Karasu singling out Isagi as the team's weakest link. And Isagi's difficulties are put into even starker relief through the comparison with Chigiri, who's playing on the other team. Chigiri showcases his ability to coexist with the top 6 by offering them a new option for their attack patterns. And his efforts immediately garner the approval of Karasu and Otoya. So to put it differently, where Isagi struggles with his limits as a solo player, Chigiri effortlessly slots in with Blue Lock's best. That brings us to the U20 match. After their initial struggle with the U20 team's ironclad defensive structure, the Blue Lock 11 starts improvising in the face of this unprecedented challenge. Their time in this hellish training program has honed their ability to navigate unexpected trials. And right after Blue Lock's first goal, Chigiri comes to the fore as the missing piece to crack open the U20's three-tier defensive structure. He pulls off a feat of sprinting from beyond his wildest dreams, and thereby sets up the goal that brings the Blue Lock 11 out on top. Chigiri's character is used very deliberately here. This is the moment where the challengers prove they have what it takes to go above and beyond, breaking through the established order in the process. But this dynamic changes significantly once Shido subs onto the field in the match's second half and brings the U20 team back into the running. And talking about running, there's one character on the Blue Lock side who won't be doing much of that anymore. Chigiri pulled out all stops to prevent Shido's goal, yet his efforts fall short against the absolute beast that is Blue Lock's number 2. And more than that, Chigiri overexerted himself in that play and needs to be swapped out. So on a structural level, the U20 team's comeback perfectly coincides with the moment where Chigiri finds himself confronted with the consequences of his injury, for the first time since the first selection. And with that, Chigiri's situation is portrayed as a proxy for his team as a whole. Just like Chigiri, the Blue Lock 11 has hit its limits once Shido and Sai start popping off. So now we reach the last leg on Chigiri's journey so far. I've already discussed how Chris Prince's speech calls to mind the mistakes from Chigiri's past, but at the same time, Chigiri in the Manshine match once again serves as a point of comparison to Isagi. For our protagonist, the Manshine match represents the moment he closes the distance between himself and Michael Kaiser. At the start of the match, Kaiser is still the strictly superior player, and Isagi hasn't figured out how to bridge the gap. And that's put into relief by the way Isagi is juxtaposed to Chigiri, who immediately brings the teachings of his new team into reality with the first goal of the match. And more than that, Chigiri realizes Noah's instructions from the start of the NEL. Right now, Isagi is still unable to verbalize the ideal that will make him the world's greatest striker. And that's contrasted to Chigiri, who has reconfigured his scoring formula to actualize his ideal of becoming number 1. Chigiri can basically talk through every step that he needs to take. With that, Chigiri becomes the first Blue Lock player to rise to the next level. In essence, the dynamic in the NEL perfectly replicates that of both the Team V match and the third selection. Just like against Team V, the NEL sees Bachira pave the way, but Chigiri being the first to transcend. And just like the third selection, Isagi struggles to carve out a space for himself in a new team, while Chigiri asserts himself with ease. And that is acknowledged by Kaiser as well. Bastard's Emperor threatens that he'll soon lose interest in Isagi if he doesn't reach Chigiri's level. At the same time, there's of course one other character to whom Chigiri forms an active contrast in the NEL, that being Nagi. This is something I'll elaborate in a full-length Manshine analysis, and yes, you may hold me accountable to that. But Nagi, unlike Chigiri, fails to internalize Prince's teachings, and we're shown the outcome of that in Manshine's next matches. Nagi has stagnated in an environment where everyone else is evolving rapidly, and this is illustrated by constant comparisons with Chigiri. Against PXG, Nagi ends up prostrate on the ground, whereas Chigiri scored the only goal of his team. And in their subsequent match, it was Chigiri and not Nagi, who stopped the Uber's top striker in his tracks. So in short, where Nagi has hit a wall after his miracle goal, Chigiri manages to keep up with even the most dangerous threats in the NEL. And that's, I guess, where we're at right now. I hope that I've managed to convince you that the manga is using Chigiri's character in very deliberate and interesting ways, even if his personal growth is rarely the focus these days. So, let me know if I've missed anything in the comments, and if you liked what you saw, consider subscribing for more in-depth Blue Lock analysis every other week. I'm looking forward to seeing you again sometime soon.